Okay. Okay, great. Hi, everybody. This is Seth again, Head of Operations here at QUOINE. And this evening, I'm joined by Kain Warwick from the Havven Project. Welcome, Kain.
Hey, how's it going? Thanks for having
Great,
us.
great. Happy to have you here. So from yesterday, we listed the Havven token that's ticker HAV on Cryptos. We can currently see it trading on Cryptos. It looks like there's some good volumes already. And this evening, I'm really excited to speak with Kain and learn more about the project and the problems that are being solved by this token. So, but before we get into that, I'd really like to know a little bit about yourself and your background. What were you doing before blockchain?
Before we started the Havven project, I ran and actually still do run a company called Blueshift. And Blueshift is the largest crypto on-ramp in Australia. So I've been running that company since about 2014. And we work with a lot of the exchanges in Australia and brokers to allow people to purchase crypto over the counter using cash. So I've been in blockchain for a while now.
Okay. And what made you start thinking about transitioning from sort of the more traditional, almost like conversion from fiat and providing a gateway into something like the Havven project?
I think that as Ethereum started to gain prominence in 2015 and early 2016, I was getting more involved in the space. Obviously, the majority of our transactions for Blueshift back then were Bitcoin. And I'd always felt, my background is in online retail and payments. And I'd always felt like Bitcoin was kind of the best way of transacting online, except for the volatility. That was just a fundamental issue that you really couldn't solve. It's great for trading, but not so much for payments. And
Right.
so a lot of the early Ethereum people, Vitalik, Vlad, and a bunch of other people had been talking about stablecoins and this concept of stablecoins creating a decentralized stable cryptocurrency. And so that, as I guess, got more involved in the space, became kind of the problem that I fixated on. Having come from a retail background, understanding how important it is that when you're using a payment method that it's easy to use and that it's stable and all that sort of stuff. So ultimately, I saw that as a huge opportunity. And the more research I did, the more I thought that building something like a payment network that was decentralized would be the solution to that problem.
Fantastic. So let's talk a little bit about the Havven token, what role it plays in the ecosystem, and who are going to be the users of the Havven token.
So the Havven network actually uses two tokens. So the Havven token is the collateral token. It is what allows the system to function. It's what backs the system. And then there's another token called the Nomen, which is NUSD. So that's the USD tracking token. That's the token that people use to actually make payments and to trade against, and all of the other sort of use cases that we imagine for it. So what you do if you are holding Havven tokens is you basically provide the stability for the network. You stake those tokens, and against those stake tokens, you can issue stable coins. And the value of the stable coin is underpinned by that collateral. So the Havven token is ultimately, I suppose, the easiest way to think about it is the ability to participate in this decentralized payment network. If you've got Havven tokens, you can participate in the network.
Got you. And so the Havven tokens, they're also used in a sense for the fees that are being paid by the different participants of the system?
Yeah, so the fees accrue to people who participate in the system. So if you're holding Havven tokens and you stake them, you lock them up in a smart contract. And in locking them up, you can issue stable coins. And as people transact in the stable coins, fees are generated, just like any other payment network, whether it's Visa or MasterCard or PayPal or American Express. The more people transact, the more fees accrue. So because you're performing the function of collateralizing the system as a Haven token holder, you get those fees the better you perform that function.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now tell me, so we talk about stablecoin. How is the stablecoin in the Haven ecosystem different than, say, some of the tokens out there that are claiming a one-to-one linkage to a fiat currency?
I guess there's a few differences, but there's also some similarities. So, some of the fiat-backed tokens, or even gold-backed tokens, I think there's diamond-backed tokens. There's a whole bunch of real-world asset-backed tokens, right? Is that in order to provide stability for a crypto asset at the moment, you really need to have some kind of collateral. So, in the Haven ecosystem, the collateral is the Haven token, which is basically just representing the fees that are being generated by the network. In some of the fiat-backed systems, you have money that's in a bank account somewhere that is basically collateralizing the system. The challenge that you have with those sorts of systems is ultimately you need to trust whoever is maintaining the diamonds or the gold or the cash or whatever is underpinning it, and that really reduces this sort of trustlessness of the system. It's a little bit ironic that Bitcoin was created as a way to avoid these systems that require trust, and yet it's kind of spawned these trusted systems which are collateralized by real world assets. So what we set out to do was to have a form of collateral that was on the blockchain and didn't require anyone to administer, didn't require trust.
Right. So you in a sense tackled the issue. You've dealt with the issue of credible issuance, right? So
Correct.
We're no longer relying on some entity to state that there is a linkage between the tokenized asset and let's call it the analog asset or off-chain asset.
100%, because that's a fundamental limitation of any real-world asset, right? Ultimately, it can't really be tokenized. There's some level of trust that's required once you're off-chain. And so our view was to keep everything on chain. So everything is totally transparent. You can see exactly how many Haven tokens there are. You can see how much the collateral value is worth, and you can see how many of the stable coins have been issued against it. And at all times, you've got full transparency of the network.
Fantastic. So this is an elegant solution. And I suppose that you don't have to worry about, regulators or, governments asking what you're doing with their currency. Because you put everything on chain, you don't claim to have any linkage to off chain, and you're relying on the power of the network and the staking model or the collateral model. You solved a lot of problems here. In creating a stablecoin.
Yeah, we certainly think so. But I should probably also mention that in order to do that, you need to have some kind of a model where fees are charged, right? In order for the system to be self-contained, it does function like a decentralized payment network. Payment networks work because people pay fees in the same way that exchanges work, right? You wouldn't be here if people weren't paying fees to trade, right? On crypto.
No, I'm doing this out of the goodness of my heart, but no.
But people need to pay fees if they're getting utility, right? And those fees encourage you to perform a better service. The same thing is true for our payment network. We believe that there is a lot of demand for a decentralized payment network, a stable cryptocurrency, and people will pay to use it. That's fundamentally the view that we have.
Okay, so talk to me about some of the initial use cases where you think the NEM tokens and the halves are going to be disrupting, or let's call it even developing the crypto economy.
Sure. So I think that there are kind of two broad use cases. One is just a decentralized form of money that's stable. If you go back to the Bitcoin white paper, it's basically a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. That was what was being described, right? Unfortunately, as we've realized, a fixed currency of 21 million Bitcoins means that it doesn't really function as a cash system because it's extremely volatile. So if you want a peer-to-peer cash system, you need something that's non-volatile. So for us, we see that original use case of what a decentralized internet money could look like as being realized by that people can transact in the world over the internet in a stable form of cryptocurrency. That's ultimately the use case that we see for Havven. But on top of that, obviously, you've got all of the other systems like insurance contracts and decentralized prediction markets, all of which will work far more efficiently if there's a decentralized, stable asset that can be traded. And so, we see, and even I could sit here and give you 10 use cases that I can think of, but the reality is once you have a viable stablecoin, there will be 100 other use cases that no one's even thought of that will be built on top of it. So.
Okay, so where there's smart contracts, where there needs to be a certainty of settlement, if you will, of value or the payoff, that's where you see the value of having the NEMs as the denominated currency, right?
Correct. Yeah, as the medium of exchange on those platforms.
Sure. What about partnerships and that you guys, that the Havven project has entered into? Can you tell us about some of those?
Yeah, so we're obviously talking to a lot of people because we think there's a lot of platforms that can use this. But one that we just recently announced was Swappy. So they're a lending platform. As you can imagine, anything that has kind of a time element, right? If I'm going to give you something and expect something back in a future time that's longer than seconds or minutes, you need a stable currency, a stable medium of exchange. And so the idea that you'd be able to lend out a stable cryptocurrency or use that as collateral for some other type of loan, we see a lot of value in that and allowing much more efficient lending markets to be built on blockchain.
So if we go back to sort of your project, the project roadmap, obviously the ICO recently, very successful. Congratulations. And we've got our first listing on an exchange. I'm sure there'll be more to come. But in terms of the development of the ecosystem, what are the next key milestones?
So we actually just launched on Ropsten testnet yesterday the initial Ether-backed Nomen contract. So what this is doing for us is basically using some of the Ether from the sale to create a sort of pseudo stablecoin that we've built, and the purpose of that is to allow us to gather a little bit more data before we launch the Havven-backed Nomen contract, which is probably a few months away still. So there's a lot of work that's gone into that. You can read the white paper. It's pretty well described, but there are certain parameters and certain things that we need to tune to get right. One of the important ones is obviously fees. One thing that is kind of still unclear is how the market will respond to fees, particularly in high volume situations like trading. What's the break point where fees are too high? So that process over the next 2 or 3 months, we're going to use these Ether-backed Nomens as a way of kind of testing some of the parameters.
Gotcha. So is there an analog version of network fees that you're looking to compare yourself to? So for instance, Visa, MasterCard might take 2.5% of the value of the transaction. Where do you think you can get the Havven ecosystem to in terms of fees? In terms of value of the transaction?
Yeah, of course. I think we need to be a lot cheaper than that. If we just replicate the sort of analog world fees, one of the beauties of blockchain is it can be far more efficient. You can take out all of the inefficiencies that exist in those those centralized payment networks. So we're targeting fees of about 15 basis points. 0.15%, because ultimately, the network will grow far faster the lower the fees are. So that's essentially what we're trying to aim for. But it may be the fees need to be a little bit higher. They might need to be a little bit lower. So the ETH-backed Nomen sort of initial phase of the project will give us a lot more information about that.
Okay, so you're doing this testing of the stable coin using Ethereum. Is that in the testnet today?
It is. It's on Ropsten at the moment. So you can go to our blog. You can go and buy some EUSD, so Ether-backed USD tokens, and play around with them. And hopefully in the next week or so, we'll be launching on mainnet. So we're getting pretty close.
Okay. Yeah. Fantastic. And so think the other thing we need to think about in terms of payment systems, and you mentioned Bitcoin. So Bitcoin can write 7 transactions per second. I guess Ethereum can write something like 20 transactions per second.
Yeah.
Where do you think, tell me about scalability in
Sure.
the NEM and Have ecosystem, and what do you need to get to? Where are you at today, and where do you think you need to get to?
So obviously Haven's built on top of Ethereum, and our view behind building on top of Ethereum is sort of twofold. On one hand, we believe that Ethereum has probably the most credible path to scalability of any blockchain that's around at the moment. That's obviously a controversial opinion. There's a lot of people that are probably screaming at their screens right now, but that's our view. And but even more importantly for us, above scalability, is transaction volume and where people exist in the ecosystem, because our network really is going to sort of live and die based on transaction volume and fee yield and fees generated. We need to go where the transactions are, and at the moment that's Ethereum. Obviously we know that all of the existing blockchains now can't support 70,000 transactions a second, like a Visa or a MasterCard network, but that's I suppose to a certain extent an assumption we're building into our project, that Ethereum will scale, or that some scalable blockchain will exist for us to build on top of.
I'm with you, Kain. You can't be involved in fintech if you're not forward looking. It's not you're not from North America, but we have a famous hockey player, Wayne Gretzky. He says it's not where the hockey puck is, it's where it's going. So I think we have to assume that a lot of these scalability issues on the platforms will improve one way or the other. Is considering building like a Havven blockchain, is that something you've considered, or you?
Yeah, we could. We could, but again, network effects are critically important for a payment network, right? You've got to go where people are. And so to build your own blockchain is fine, but if the transaction volume isn't there, then that's not really going to be viable. So
sure. Great. So so after the 2 to 3 months of testing, what do you take me further down the roadmap of the project?
So by the time we get to around mid-year, we believe we'll be ready to allow people to issue nomens against their havens, so NUSD. And that will essentially entail someone saying, I've got a certain value of Havven tokens. I'm going to lock up those tokens into a smart contract, and against those tokens, I'm going to issue NUSD, which they can then trade with someone, they can sell, they can hold on to it, they can do any number of things. And what that initial phase will have hopefully shown us is all the parameters that we need to get right in order for NUSD to be stable moving forward. Now, I keep saying NUSD because obviously USD is probably the most obvious currency to choose initially, but it's not the only currency that exists. There are other currencies out there, and so one of the next phases after we get NUSD up and running and demonstrate that the network is growing and that it's stable and viable is to issue other forms of currency against the network. So, we might have AUD or, KRW or, any number of different currencies that we might support. And what will be super interesting about that is that what you'll ultimately end up with, if you've got all of these sort of proxies for currencies, is you'll be able to have really cheap and efficient Forex trading and exchange. And so I'll be able to send money to you in Japan, and you'll be able to convert from NAUD to NYen with almost no fees. It'll probably be likely to be just the transaction fees. So that's something that we find super exciting.
Have you actually thought about partnering with exchanges to have these stable coins traded against each other?
Yeah, of course. Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. Once we get there, people need to be able to have a place to exchange them. So, exchanges are the obvious place to go for that. But I think we still have a long way to go to prove that we can deliver on this roadmap. And we're working very hard now to kind of get out and start delivering and start shipping some code. But the further we get, the more sort of momentum we get, the easier it'll be to convince exchanges that we can deliver on, because there is another scalability question here, which all stablecoins need to deal with, which is how do you actually scale to support enough circulating currency for the demand that. And that's been a problem. It's one thing if you're depositing fiat into a bank account, there's an almost endless supply of fiat, right? And if you run out, you can always print more. So for us to be able to scale the network, we believe that we need to have the transaction volume, the fees being generated so that we can have enough NUSD or NYen or whatever the currency is to actually support the volumes. And in order to convince exchanges like yourselves that we're credible and that we can deliver that, we probably need a few tens of millions, or if not hundreds of millions of value out there in the on chain to support that.
So use cases, communities. What is your strategy for the development of the project? Are you bringing in? Is it open sourced, or are you doing it all in house? And what's your guys' approach for this?
So it is open source. We've released it under MIT. We see it as another protocol layer on the blockchain. So anyone can go and GitHub's open. You can go and check it out. If you're interested in participating in the project, we'd love to talk to you about it. If you're a developer that is looking for a project, we're absolutely looking to hire people at the moment to kind of scale up the team. So by all means, reach out to us. We'd love to talk to you.
Sounds great, Kain. Listen, I want to thank you very much for telling us about the project. Actually, before we go, there's one more thing. Tell me about the blockchain scene in Australia. And what is the government's view and where we are in terms of regulatory framework for distributed ledger technology? And how is the community doing?
I think we're very lucky. The government has taken a fairly hands-off approach and a fairly measured approach to what's going on at the moment. And I think that's very lucky for Australia, because one of the challenges that Australia has had has been accessing global capital. So startups have really struggled in Australia to raise money. We've obviously got some exceptional successes like Atlassian and people like that, Canva. But it has been hard typically for startups to raise money. And so I think that being able to raise money through token sales is something that a lot of projects and a lot of businesses are looking into now. And so I think that we're going to see a lot of amazing projects come out of Australia, but it's still very early days for us. We've had some good projects. We've had Power Ledger. There's a few others that have done fairly well, and have got a fairly high profile. But there's a lot of stuff that I'm already seeing that's kind of coming behind us and behind some of those early projects, Chronobank, et cetera, that's going to be super interesting.
Fantastic. Kain, thanks very much for joining us, and we're looking forward to hearing more about the project. And when you issue the first Havven-backed NUST, let me know.
I will, absolutely. Thanks very much. It's great talking to you.
Thank you, sir. Bye.
Thanks. See ya.